everybody here this morning. We're going to be in John chapter 12. John chapter 12. If you recall, last week we were supposed to do, John 11 and 12, but because of Vacation Bible School and us not having a Wednesday night, so we will do John 12 today, and then Wednesday night we will do the healing lepers, Luke 17. So John chapter 12. Before we get started, it looks like we had a very good Vacation Bible School. Let's remember all of those on the sick list. Brother Charles is outside, but he's just heavy weather, I call it. All the moisture in the air and everything is not helping his breathing any. Holly seems to be going backwards. It's starting to look like that surgery didn't do all that they hoped it would do, but the doctor just keeps telling her, just wait a little longer. You got some healing to do. So still hopeful on that, but she needs your prayers. Brother Terry is not having one of his better days, so keep him in your prayers. Tina is, I forgot to ask about Tina. Is she doing some better? And of course, Sister Dot, keep her in undergoing chemotherapy, and still need to keep the Amy Turner family in our prayers over the family over her loss. Is there anything else that we need to? Brother Hoagland, would you lead us in a prayer then, please? Okay, John chapter 12. Verse 1 says, Then Jesus, 6 days before the Passover, came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, which had been dead, whom he raised from the dead. And where did we hear that before? Previous chapter. Remember, that's the way it started out, by telling, John, when he wrote, he looked back, so he was trying to tell everybody what was going on. And remember, Bethany is only a couple of miles from Jerusalem. And now we're getting down to 6 days before the Passover, and this is going to be the last Passover. This is going to be the one where Christ dies. There has been some discussion and some confusion probably between this and Matthew about timing. Some people want to say that Lazarus was raised 3 or 4 months before this event, and some want to go that it was just shortly before this event, but it really doesn't matter in that respect. Another thing is that they want to put, as we get to the next verse or so, that they was in the house of Simon the leper. I do believe that this makes a deal, so we're going to look at it. Matthew 26:6. Matthew 26:6. When we get to Matthew 26, start with verse 6, it says, Now when Jesus was in Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, there came unto him a woman having an alabaster box of very precious ointment, and poured it on his head as he sat at meat. Now, if you will also look at Mark 14 and verse 3, And being in Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, as he sat at meat, there came a woman having an alabaster box of ointment of spikenard, very precious, and she brake the box and poured it on his head. Now, the reason I brought those two readings in is because it tells that the woman, unnamed, had an alabaster box, and Mark then informs us that that precious ointment that was referred to in Matthew was spikenard. Both accounts have it pouring it on his head, and then a similar statement that he makes about leave her alone. Now let's look at this account in John. There they made him a supper, and Martha served, but Lazarus was one of them that sat at the table with him. Then took Mary a pound of ointment of spikenard, very costly, and anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped his feet with her hair, and the house was filled with the odor of the ointment. Now, personally, I think that this is two different situations, because in the Matthew and Mark account, the oil was poured on his head. Here, the oil is poured on his feet. Also, in the Matthew and Mark account, it plainly says that it was Simon the leper's house. Here, it does not tell whose house it is, but I believe you can infer that it was Martha's house, because who was serving? Martha. Would it make sense for Martha to be the one serving if they was in Simon the leper's house? Possible, but again, I think this is two separate events, two separate occasions, and but it really doesn't matter. Brother Cox.
Do you think these two people knew getting him ready?
Brother Cox just asked an interesting question. He said, do you think that these two people knew that Jesus was about to be crucified and they was getting him ready? Who's going to answer that? Brother Joel's going to answer it. Yes, sir. Verse 7 says, then Jesus let her alone against the day of my burying. Has she kept this? It alludes to it, but even the people that was with him on a daily basis, his disciples and the ones that was going to be his apostles, those that followed him daily for almost 3 years, were clueless. So would it make sense for these two women, Martha being one named and the woman unnamed, to have any knowledge of that? It is my opinion that they did not, that it was just they were trying to do something because of who he was to make him feel good. Because one of the customs in those days was anybody that visited, what was one of the first things they did? Wash their feet. So here Martha's taking care of his feet. Even today in that region of the world, people from that region of the world even take better care of their feet than they do their hands and than other parts of their body when it comes to cleanliness. So if we put it in sequence, I think that the women were just doing something nice, trying to make him comfortable and feel good because it was important. But I don't think that they knew that it was that imminent because, like I say, his apostles didn't even know it. Anybody got a different opinion or want to throw a rock at me? Or something to think about. And that's the reason I brought up the issue of the house. Does it matter which house he was in? No. But, you know, that discussion is out there, and I just want you to sort of play the devil's advocate and look at it from all angles. It doesn't matter. This is where he is, and this is what's going to happen. But it says that when she took the ointment and poured it on him, verse 4 says, then one of the disciples, and in the other readings, it was references all of the disciples brought it up about the waste of money. But here, the one disciple, Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, which should, and the word should here would be better translated would. And I believe that there are even some versions of the Bible, if I'm not mistaken, the ESV for one has about to. So it's not that he should betray him, but he was going to betray him, or he was about to betray him, would be a better understanding of that verse. Verse 5 says, why was not this ointment sold for 300 pence and given to the poor? Remember, this is Judas Iscariot talking. And what position did he have among the apostles? He was the treasurer. He carried the bag. And what is he known to be? Thief. So is he really interested in the money of that ointment going to take care of the needy? Again, because of his history and all, it appears that he just he lost out on some money, so he was a little upset. Brother Jim. Perfect politician. We're going to leave that one alone today. This, he said, not that he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief and had the bag and bear what was put therein. What does the word bear mean? I'm sorry? Stole. Huh? Stick your finger. Well, I guess you could say he was responsible for it, because if he took it, it was his, right? No, but in essence, it was to steal. He was more interested in it to steal it than it was to do anything else with it. Yes, sir. Helped themselves. In essence, he didn't even have to embezzle. He didn't keep record. He just, it was there for use, and he used it. Yes, sir, Brother Golden. Right. So almost, yeah. Yes, sir. That plus the Martha owned the house and things, so it indicates that they were, the family was in pretty good shape. Yes, sir. Verse 7, then Jesus said, let her alone. Against the day of my burying hath she kept this. For the poor always ye have with you, but me ye have not always. Now, based on what Brother Cox had questioned earlier, if you recall in previous lessons how Jesus had been trying to teach and train them as to what was going to take place, and they didn't understand and they didn't believe, even it's not in this lesson, but I'm going to bring it up for information. When he is in Jerusalem, Matthew chapter 23, when they enter Jerusalem, and he looks around and says that the temple, everything is going to fall down. What question, I think it's verse 3 of chapter 24, what question do the apostles ask him at this time? What's the sign and when will it be? And what are they thinking of? Go to Acts chapter 1 and verse 6. Acts 1 and verse 6. All right. So here they are, his final days in Jerusalem. He's telling them that things are going to be destroyed. They're asking for signs. And he has been trying to tell them for 3.5 years that there is going to be what kind of kingdom? A heavenly kingdom. After all this time, after his death, after his burial, after his resurrection, after they have seen him, we'd call it in the form of a ghost, but his resurrected body, after he has appeared to them after death on numerous occasions over a 40-day period of time, when they meet here, about 10 days before his ascension, before Pentecost, what question are they asking? Are you going to set up an earthly kingdom? So that's the reason that I go back and say the apostles were clueless until the day of Pentecost as to all that was going to take place. They didn't know when he was going to die on the cross. So that's the reason I'm thinking that the women didn't either, that they just knew he was an important person and was doing good things for him. Questions or other comments on that so far? Verse 9, much people of the Jews therefore knew that he was there, and they came not for Jesus' sake only, but they that might see Lazarus also, whom he had raised from the dead. Do you find it interesting that John, when he wrote this, says that the much people of the Jews therefore knew, and not only came to see him, but came to see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead? What is John's birthright, or so? Where does he come from? He's a Galilean, and he often in writing referred to anybody of Jerusalem to be a Jew. So that's probably what he meant here, because the people flocked from Jerusalem to see what was going on. Don't you imagine also that when it says that they not only came to see him, they come to see him because he was who he was, but they came to see Lazarus? If we had heard that something like this had happened, wouldn't we drive to wherever to lay eyes on somebody that had been raised from the dead? So it's word gets around on these things. Brother Golden, you had your hand up. Right. Yeah. And then we're going to get to other people in another verse or two, but yes, sir. That's true. Well, that was the Sadducees. Well, if we go back into the previous chapter, how many of them were there when Jesus called him out of the tomb and saw it, witnessed it, and then still didn't believe? Some did and some didn't. I'm not from Missouri. I'm from North Alabama, but I got a lot of Missouri in me, and there's some things that if I lay eyes on it and see it, I have to believe it. And here makes you wonder. But the chief priest consulted that they might put Lazarus also to death, because that by reason of him many of the Jews went away and believed on him. Again, you go back to Brother Joel, if you'll go back to the previous chapter, chapter 11, and read verse 45 in John. All right. That's what we had talked about. Some believed, some didn't. And then in this verse, the chief priest consulted that they might put Lazarus to death, because that by reason of him many of the Jews went away and believed on Jesus. Why would they be wanting to put Lazarus to death? I mean, in the previous chapter, they also said that they had made up their minds that they was going to put Jesus to death. They was going to kill him. Well, if they kill the source, why are they going to kill Lazarus? Reminder, evidence. Still, those people would believe on Jesus because they had seen what he had done with Lazarus.
Still over evidence, time, evidence kind of fades, especially if you're a propagandist, you think the whole thing is sort of thing. He did raise over time.
You can see that in the majority of history. Throughout history, if you read a book that is really, really close to the source, it'll tell you one thing. And then if you read a book that's written 100 years later, depending on where that person's philosophies are, that book is going to be a little bit different. So by the time you get on down the road, it's not even going to look like the same. The Egyptians, for instance, they went through and every pharaoh would erase everything that the previous one had done, or else they would embellish what they had done so they could outdo the previous one. Yes, sir.
That is to change history.
Yes, sir. It's not just that, but it's, I don't want to get on the schools too badly, but today, if you ask a high school senior, what are the Nuremberg trials? How many high school seniors could answer that question? How many could tell you who was on trial? Not by name, but by group. Why was there the Nuremberg trials? And that didn't happen 100 years ago. And there's many other things that go through that. Looking at a positive, how many people in here know that a special unit in the military service was responsible for the accuracy of the artillery and bombs were all women? They were called the computer, help me out, brother Doug. It was called the computer something, and it was all women. They were such good mathematicians that the sheet that they did all their math on because of all the new weapons coming out and the projectiles being different weights and different loads and all, these women had figured it out mathematically. If you shoot this at this, and they had those when they were zeroing in their targets, and but nobody knows that. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of people don't realize that today a tank can be traveling and another tank traveling 15 miles away, and this tank can shoot that tank with it traveling 15 miles away and still hit it. All based on that, yeah. So when it comes, yes, sir, when it comes to the point of history, I forgot who said that, but when it comes to the point of history, you got to be real careful of the sources you read to make sure they're accurate. Verse 12, on the next day, much people that were come to the feast, when they heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem, took branches of palm trees and went forth to meet him and cried, Hosanna, blessed is the King of Israel that cometh in the name of the Lord. And Jesus, when he had found a young ass, sat thereon, as it is written, Fear not, daughter of Zion, behold, the King cometh, sitting on an ass colt. These things understand not his disciples at the first, but when Jesus was glorified, then remembered they that these things were written of him, and that they had done these things unto him. And Brother Cox, if you remember what I said, this verse just sort of puts it out, that the disciples did not at first remember even the prophecies that had been written about him. Verse 17, the people therefore that was with him when he called Lazarus out of the grave and raised him from the dead bear record. So word's getting around by bearing record that this means, the witnesses go out and they talk about it and tell what's going on. Verse 18, for this cause the people also met him, for they had heard that he had done this miracle. Now, the Pharisees therefore said among themselves, perceive ye not how ye prevail nothing? Behold, the world is gone after him. Now, who were the Pharisees? The leaders. What did they already determine they was going to do with Jesus? Kill him. Why? Well, they was getting rid of Lazarus, the evidence, but they was killing Jesus because he was hurting their well-being. If we go back to the previous chapter, it was because they were in appointed positions and they would lose their power, lose their influence if everybody started gravitating toward Christ. Verse 20, and there were certain Greeks among them that came up to worship at the feast. Now there's some conversation about who these Greeks were. One, they were either proselytes or Jews that lived in Greece, or they were Gentiles from Greece. Based on the reading of this one verse, well, let's go to these two verses. And there was certain Greeks among them that came up to worship at the feast. The same came therefore to Philip, which was of Bethsaida of Galilee, and desired him, saying, Sir, we would see Jesus. So, had of common sense, who would it most likely be? Personally, I lean toward the proselyte because Jews came to Jerusalem at the Passover. So why would he refer to them as certain Greeks? They were Jews if they were Jews living in Greece, right? And Gentiles could have been, but to me, all the Greeks, all the proselytes, all the Jews were flocking at that time. So to me, anyway, again, it really doesn't matter, but personally, I just believe that it was Greek proselytes that had come to worship. And then they'd gone to Philip wanting to see Jesus. Philip cometh and telleth Andrew, and again Andrew and Philip tell Jesus. All right. This particular time, wouldn't you imagine Jesus is pretty busy? And here's some people come and want to talk to him. Starting with verse 23. Jesus answered them, saying, the hour is come that the Son of Man should be glorified. Verily, verily, I say unto you, except a corn of wheat fall into the ground and die, it abideth alone. But if it die, it bringeth forth much fruit. He that loveth his life shall lose it, and he that hateth his life in this world shall keep it unto eternal life. If any man serve me, let him follow me, and where I am, there shall also my servant be. If any man serve me, him will my Father honor. Now is my soul troubled, and what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour. But for this cause came I unto this hour. So, in essence, what he is trying to tell them at this point is that things are getting very, very close. When it says that he is to be glorified, what event did it take to glorify Christ? The cross, because death, burial, resurrected, and yes, sir, you got your hand up still? That is, but personally, I don't go along with that because it is also traditional the way that they spoke in those days, that where it says that Jesus answered them saying, they didn't have to ask the question. He just started talking about an event. So I'm taking that to be more that than anything else. That, and also he might have known what was in their mind without them ever verbalizing anything. But I take it to be here that they'd come to talk to him, and he just said, "Well, I'm going to tell you this," and went on about it. Correct. But when we look at this whole section here, again, if we just try to put things in a timeline, we're about 6 days before the Passover, before he's going to die on the cross. He's trying to inform them everything that's going on, that it's about time for him to be glorified. And as we've already said, they were sort of clueless at this point. But when he comes down to this verse, it says, "Now my soul is troubled, and what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour." He's sort of puzzling, asking the question, because what did he do just a few days later? Pray, Garden of Gethsemane scene. And what was his prayer there? If it be thy will, take this cup from me. So even before then, and to me, this just shows the human side of Christ. He knew his purpose, because he even states that, "But for this cause came I unto this hour." So he absolutely knows that that's the plan. But yet the human side of him, he's not wanting to. And if you look at it on another plane, uh, and I stated this to a doctor well, not several, but a few years ago, when I was diagnosed with cancer, before I went through the treatment. Uh, we was talking, and he brought up the subject of God, and was telling me that, man can only do so much, and I was totally agreeing with him. And I said, "I am prepared to die, but I'm not ready to die." What's the difference between those two? Pardon? I'm prepared. I can face whatever, but I'd really like to hang around a little bit longer. I think this is sort of the message here that's going on. And thankfully, they gave me the right dosage of radiation, and I'll be around another day or two. Brother Cox, and then Brother Jim.
Knowing what's going to transpire at that point that you go, I don't think I was going to know what's going to happen. But the foreknowledge he had, sure that he knew everything that was going to happen. That he couldn't decide. I'm sure it's going to it.
Well, Brother Cox just said, if you didn't hear him, that he said he thinks he doesn't want to know when he's going to die. And I sort of understand and agree with that. But if you recall some previous lessons that I've taught, how back in the 1600s that people were being crucified, or not crucified, but they were being, for preaching baptism, they were taken out and killed in various ways, and how the people would still be trying to teach while they were undergoing the various tortures that they went to right before the end. Brother Joel, I saw you, but Brother Jim had it.
We can see some examples of the military, especially think back on invasions, or Normandy would be the first example. When they're going on those transport ships for the Normandy shore, their soul was troubled, just this verse says. And what are they going to say? Save me from this. I mean, there's no stopping. They know. Like Jesus, he said he had to go to Jerusalem. He had to go through this. They know where that transport ship was taking them. All the German, embankments up on the mountain. And what are they going to say? Save me from this. And then they can say, for this reason, I came here. In other words, a lot of those young people said that, yes, I'm going to go. It's for that very reason they did that. And they knew what was coming. And what did they do? Say, no, hey, save me from it. It was going to happen. They had that emotion that they didn't want to die. And that's the same thing. Jesus has that emotion that his soul is troubled, but he's there. And that's the reason he's there. And it's coming, and he knows it. And so we have examples of that even, and I say normally, but even today, but I think about that especially just because of what was facing them at Atlanta.
Theoretical question on Normandy. Which was the scariest, the first wave going in or the second wave going in? The first wave, they know they're going in and they don't know exactly what's going to happen. They can imagine, but the second wave going in, they see all the dead in the water red. And so from the time they get within 50 yards of the beach until the time they hit the beach, be a sobering time to think. Brother Joel, you had your hand up. Mm-hmm. I think that is explained in great detail in the next verse. Father, glorify thy name. Then came there a voice from heaven saying, I have both glorified it and will glorify it again. Think about that for just a second. What does that mean? I've already glorified it, but I'm going to glorify it again. I got you. Well, you're at this point, which means that you're going to be the Savior of the world. Then after you die, then you're going to be with me. I believe that's the sequence, personally. Okay. 29, the people therefore that stood by and heard it, and that it thundered, and others said an angel spake to him. There's been a lot of talk about this, whether they heard two different things or whether some was not close enough to hear and all, which really doesn't matter. The people just had heard it and understood it. And Jesus answered and said, this voice came not because of me, but for your sakes. Now is the judgment of this world. Now shall the prince of this world be cast out. And I, if I be lifted up from the earth, will draw all men unto me. That, to me, is the sobering statement of the whole thing. You saw me raise Lazarus. Most of you believed, some of you didn't. But if you will just follow me, other verses, he's going to prepare a place. This he said, signifying what death he should die. The people answered him, we have heard out of the law that Christ abideth forever and forever. And how sayest thou the Son of Man must be lifted up? Who is this Son of Man? Again, a lot of people are not really got it all together as to just what's going on. And Jesus said unto them, yet a little while is the light with you. Walk while ye have the light, lest darkness come upon you. For he that walketh in darkness knoweth not whither he go. While ye have light, believe in the light, that you may be the children of light. These things spake Jesus, and departed, and did hide himself from them. So after he tells them what's going on, and tells them to stay with him, he goes off to be by himself. Verse 37 starts, but though he had done so many miracles before them, yet they believed not on him, that the saying of Isaiah the prophet might be fulfilled, which he spake, Lord, who hath believed our report, and to whom hath the arm of the Lord been revealed? This goes back to Isaiah chapter 53. Therefore they could not believe. I'm trying to speed read because Luke's in doing the count. Therefore they could not believe, because that Isaiah said again, he that hath blinded their eyes and hardened their hearts, that they should not see with their eyes nor understand their heart and be converted, and I should heal them. I'm going to skip this next section for y'all, read that on your own, but I'm going to go all the way down to verse 49. We're going to look at the last two verses. For I have not spoken of myself, but the Father which sent me. He gave me a commandment, what I should say and what I should speak. And I know that his commandment is life everlasting. Whatsoever I speak, therefore, even as the Father said unto me, so speak I. So here he is just letting everybody know that the big plan came from heaven. If you would now turn to 1 John chapter 5. 1 John chapter 5, verses 11 and 12. And this is the record that God hath given to us eternal life, and this life is in his Son. He that hath the Son hath life, and he that hath not the Son of God hath not life. So putting all that together, it just goes into other verses that talk about Jesus saying, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man enters except by me. Got done about a minute early. Any questions or comments on this, Brother Golden? Right. Yeah, I like 43 particularly, for they love the praise of men more than the praise of God. And that was the general way the Pharisees did things. They'd rather stand on the street corner and boast and brag, and rather than get down to doing things from the heart. Anyone else? Brother Joel. Yes, sir. There's a lot of people today who atheists, agnostics, they don't believe. And it reminds me of the verse in the Bible that says that every knee will bow. Your story about Judas there reminded me of that, because what happened to Judas in the end? Well, but before he hung himself, what caused him to hang himself? He took the money to betray Christ. And then he tried to give it back because the light came on. Uh-oh, it ain't worth it. But it was too late for him, and that, and so then he left the money and hanged himself. So all of that, in the end, whether people want to believe or not believe, in the end, everybody's going to bow that knee and come to the recognition that, hey, thank y'all so much for your attention and your comments. Little late though to be a believer, isn't it?